Hi, I'm Em, and this is Fang Farrier. This week, we're talking tired versus burnt out. Well, it's that time of year. Christmas is within our grasp, and I'm just tired. Gosh, I don't know whether it's just me, but I'm just ready for a break. So this last week has been a typical pre-Christmas week. There's been plenty of things that were bigger than expected. There have been plenty of cancellations because other people have found better things to do with their pre-Christmas time. And each day has got to about 4 o'clock and I've been yawning my head off. I've been just ready, head down, not finding the words, not wanting to have a new patient interaction at the end of the day because I'm just done, ready to switch off for the year and recharge and get ready for next year. But why is dentistry so tiring? I'm not sure I always found it this tiring, and I think that part of it is just life catches up on us. So when I was a student and a new grad, it was just me. I was single. There was no commitments beyond what I had wanted to make after work. And yes, I think the job was just as tiring, but life outside of work wasn't as tiring. Then probably the time that I noticed it the most was during pregnancy. And people talk about pregnancy brain and just being very tired in general throughout. And it was the first time that I both realised that it was a very physical job, because again, something I hadn't particularly considered until your physical capabilities are challenged, be that injury or pregnancy or other reasons, is that you suddenly realise that yes, it's a physical job, but it's also quite intense, thinking wise. And yes, you do get that bit of kind of brain fog with pregnancy. It carries on into feeling a bit like a zombie, trying to work alongside having small children that aren't sleeping through the night and those things. And whilst I'm kind of well beyond those years, my youngest is 8. I still have that kind of brain fog towards the end of the day, and my husband kind of will laugh at me because I kind of come home and he doesn't get it, bless him, in terms of I just sometimes the words aren't there, the processes aren't there, everything is too hard. I've made too many decisions, my brain doesn't want to work anymore, and I find myself stuck, and I just both can't find the words but also do random things like put something that should be in the fridge on the shelf in the cupboard, and just silly things that are just not thinking things. I just must come across like a crazy person, but I find dentistry tiring, and I don't think I'm alone. But why is it so tiring? Part of the piece of the puzzle for me for this was going and hearing Nigel Larter speak at the NZDA conference in 2016. Now, for those of you outside of New Zealand, Nigel Larter is a psychologist. He is an author and has done several TV shows on parenting and criminal psychology, actually. But the best way I could describe him to someone of my era from the UK is he's kind of like the Jasper Carrot of psychology. That same kind of humorous, matter-of-fact approach. And I've always been kind of drawn to his work. Well, anyway, 2016 was when I took my break from dentistry, and we had done a survey the year before, which had been the New Zealand Dental Association Wellness Survey, and that was asking at the time how psychologically healthy are New Zealand dentists. And I remember filling this in. I was almost late for work because it was one of those, do you mind filling in a survey? And you think, well, this will be, a minute and a half of my time. And then on page 2 of 20 later, you realise you're running late or running late for work. And it was one of those, it took me by surprise because it was measuring burnout, depression, and many other things, and that the answers I was giving were quite confronting at the time. So it was a rough day at work after that because I was well and truly in burnout when answering that questionnaire. So there were 2 things for this conference. One, the keynote speaker was Nigel Latta, and he was going to talk about stress in dentistry, which I had already reached a point that I kind of understood that I'd been through something that I didn't want any other dentist to have to go through or to have to feel so unprepared for, that I was already on the beginning of my crusade for I want to share what I know and I want to find out more about it. But actually I didn't know. And at this stage I didn't know I'd burnt out. I really just thought I was broken and underprepared and I could just do better. But as I say, Nigel Latta was the keynote speaker, and then following him was Dr. Fiona Muir, who was presenting on the results of this wellness survey, which kind of piqued my interest, but to say it wasn't the main reason I was going down. So he was, I should probably give you another bit of his background, which is that he's married to a dentist and they've been together since they were at uni. So he actually has quite a unique insight into dentistry from dental student all the way through to, I would guesstimate that he's 10 years older than myself. He describes dentistry as a very brain intensive job, a brain heavy exercise, and the problem is that brains are inherently lazy. I mean, we do lots of, and I've talked about this before, we're doing lots of on the spot problem solving, reacting, changing direction, use a 2020 word, pivoting, but really just having to kind of work with what we've got. And that's not just in terms of diagnosing, it's in terms of problem solving with procedures when we've got a million things that can be different every time on a different patient with the same procedure. So you can have the experience of the procedure, but everyone has got their own nuances, be it that they're moving, being that they're drowning in their own saliva, be it that they've got a tongue that's as strong as an elephant trunk, or all these things, or that they're having difficulty and they want to cough and sit up and spit or talk, or they're hypersensitive, or they've got a terrible gag reflex, and these are things that just sound silly, but they make the same procedure actually quite a difficult thing to learn on everybody, and things that we're having to adapt and react to on a daily basis. So it is brain heavy. But he talks about brains are inherently lazy, that the default is not to think, and that thinking all day is intense, it's tiring and exhausting. And again, he mentions, I'll come back to in a minute, that glucose is brain fuel. But that's why we're so tired, and that's why some days are more tiring than others, and that the same day list for one dentist might not be tiring, might be a completely cruisy day out, and might be exhausting for the next dentist, because we've all got our different kind of comfort levels on what we find easy and what we don't, and what we find challenging and what we don't, what we thrive on and energizes our day, and what just drains us the moment we see it on the day list. I mean, thinking about kind of brain heavy activities, there's been a couple of studies and observations made on grandmaster chess players, and that whilst playing in a chess tournament, they can burn up to 60,000 calories a day. And whilst I talk about kind of calories a day, and you're busy thinking, gosh, if I'm thinking that much every day, why aren't I as skinny as a rake? But in terms of kind of certainly turning over what's going on in the brain, because the rest of us average probably about 2,000 a day. So versus an average person, a chess player is burning up as many, or 3 times as many as an average person, and sustaining an elevated blood pressure for hours, akin to elite endurance athletes. And again, I come back to dentistry. Do think of it as an endurance sport. I will come back to that in another podcast. But it's the brain's hungry, and if we're using it all day, it wants to switch off. So it shouldn't be a surprise that if you have a day that you find exhausting or challenging for you, that by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, you just want to go home, or you don't want to converse with people. And so for me, a challenging day is new patients. So I've just started at a new practice, so all the patients are new to me at the moment. And I knew that when I started, it was going to be quite a big push and quite a big effort for that first couple of months, because you need to get to know your patients, you need to establish that relationship, and all of that takes more effort. You need to listen to them and not make assumptions. You need to be planning for what they want, not necessarily kind of what you've perceived as their need, because so much of this communication will see you right in the long term, because it's going to help you be on the same page, it's going to help you avoid complaints, and it's going to help decrease stress long term. So you do have to put in this effort. So for me, new patients are a huge effort. So a combination of, at the moment, just about everyone's new. I think I've been there about 5 months. So I'm getting to the point where I'm seeing people kind of come back, and I'm going to hopefully kind of start getting to the point where we're coming on to recalls that I've seen last time round. But that aside, even in the other practice that I work in, an easy day is day of treatment that has been prescribed, as in you have seen them before, you have planned the treatment, and you've got them back. They're a patient that you've done work on before, so you know kind of how they are for treatment, and maybe treatments that you enjoy. So I like taking teeth out and don't mind a bit of the red stuff. Some people will see that and their heart rate will elevate on just seeing it on the day list. I like quite a varied day. I like a longer appointment or two, so you're not seeing the same volume of patients. But if I've got a day full of 30-minute new patient interactions, whether they be toothaches or checkups or consultations, I just finish the day done and don't want to talk to anyone. And whilst my kind of husband sees this from the interaction point of view, I was trying to explain to my children why I'm kind of the Grinch of Christmas past. And as we get to the end of term, there are things they were trying to get me to their cub thing for a fish and chip supper with the other parents who I don't know. And my husband was away, so they were trying to get me to come along to it. But the thought of having to interact with people I don't know and put some kind of effort in for the evening after a full day's work just horrifies me. I'm an introvert naturally anyway, so it's not a great experience for me. But it's hard because the kids are just like, why don't you want to come? All the other mums do. It's like, no, I'm kind of broken and done by the end of the day. That's just... I recognise that and say no to things that are going to overwhelm my coping mechanisms, because I've been there before when they've been overwhelmed, and it's hard to recover from. But another thing that kind of got me thinking about this and kind of coincided with me planning for this podcast was I recently heard Brené Brown speak on her podcast, Unlocking Us. And she spoke with David Eagleman, who's a neuroscientist at Stanford, about neuroplasticity, which might not sound that exciting, but it was a really interesting episode. And as part of it, she asked him, does the brain get tired? And the short answer is yes. The brain is using glucose as fuel, and it's harder to think clearly when you're hungry or glucose levels are low. So we are tired with less fuel and thinking becomes cloudy. So this kind of ties in with our energy levels for this are better in the morning, better at the first thing of the day, better after we've just eaten, so immediately after lunch. But in the same time that lots of people talk about that 3 o'clock kind of craving sugar, this isn't necessarily in dentistry, but just in life in general. And that low is that with that comes difficulty in making those decisions, extra effort to kind of achieve the same level of thinking and decision making and problem solving that we were achieving quite easily in the morning. And it just means a lot of cognitive energy is being burnt with all this thinking, and that it's not surprising that it's not leaving us with a lot of energy left over for the relaxed enjoyment side of things and getting home and being with your loved ones at the end today. So, I mean, it's fair to say that fatigue and exhaustion sometimes can just be part of dentistry, and there are ways to manage that in some ways in terms of managing what's going into your book. So using blocks that will stop you having a day that's chocker full of new patients, that makes it so you've got blocks that have to be longer appointments or regular planned appointments, rather than just leaving it at the will of the receptionist, or if you've got an online booking system, the will of whoever's on the other side kind of filling up your space. So there are ways to do that. So in terms of kind of what I wanted to discuss today was with the overlap of progression to burnout, because it's a phrase that burnout itself is a phrase that has been used often, but actually only warranted a formal mention in the recent 11th revision of the Internal Classification of Diseases in May 2019 by the World Health Organization. And they came up with this definition, which I do have a problem with, and we'll come back to another podcast. But for now, I'm just going to give you the definition. So they define burnout as an occupational phenomenon, not a medical condition, as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It is characterized by 3 dimensions. 1, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. 2, increased mental distance from one's job. And 3, reduced personal efficacy, i.e. the ability to produce a desired or intended effect, or to be effective, successful and productive. So you need all those 3 components to be burnt out. But the problem is with burnout is that it is chronic, and most people who suffer from it don't realise they have been until much, much later. And the overlap comes with that feeling of energy depletion or exhaustion, because we do experience that, and we experience it more at times of the year like now, where we've got an increased pressure on us from patients. We're having to try and do more in less amount of time in anticipating a break where there will be no services, and we will just finish tired. But it's whether or not when you finish on that last day before Christmas, you can step away and just enjoy life and recharge and recover and not give work more than a second thought. The burnout side of it almost comes from it. Well, for me, it felt almost like PTSD, is that even though the source of stress had gone, so for me, I had left my job and I wasn't going back to it. It wasn't a fixed break period. I wasn't going back to it. I'd had months off and it was still with me. And actually, this was about the time I went to this conference and heard these people speak. But I didn't understand it because it felt like the stress levels felt like I was still there. So whereas if you can kind of leave and put it down, and it dissipates whilst you're off and you feel like you can start afresh, versus finishing feeling like every moment is almost kind of a countdown clock to when you go back, waking up in the night thinking about that patient or that situation you're dreading, and just bone tired and exhausted, not actually wanting to participate in the things that would ordinarily recharge and revive you, and more just retreating to inactivity and withdrawal and almost a depressive kind of state, with a view that energy conservation is going to see you through. The wellness survey I was talking about was done before this definition kind of came out, so worked off slightly different variables on this, but because one thing they talk about is that, or one thing they observed is that because of the intensive contact with patients and patient related aspects that we have as a profession, that is considered a cause for increased perception of stress. So we have far more one-on-one than other medical professions, in terms of we don't have the same kind of diffusion around teams around us. Yes, we've got specialists we can refer to, but generally most people are expecting to come in and they think a tooth's a tooth, a filling's a filling, a tooth out is a tooth out, and that we should be able to do it all for them. And we take on that pressure and we try and fix it all. But they state that as a possible cause of the depersonalization, and that's something they go on about in the report from that survey, is the depersonalization side of it. Now, the WHO definition talks about increased mental distance from one's job, and that's kind of where that depersonalization kind of comes in and crosses over with it, is that certainly within dentistry, that depersonalization state where dentists perceive patients as objects rather than people, possibly in order to protect themselves from future negative experiences. That's a direct quote from the findings on the study. But that's it. It's that kind of creating a them and us, because then it's easier to deal with that way. But also it's that self-protective, you've had your fingers burnt doing something, or you've had a complaint about something, and as we all know, quite often the worst complaints don't actually have any clinical basis to them. They've normally had great treatment. The basis of the complaint is quite often communication orientated, or a misunderstanding of what they wanted and what you thought you were providing for them and what they were asking for. And you have one of those experiences, and your kind of heightened self-survival skills, or you recognize in that in your next interaction, and rather than push the boundaries and step out of your comfort zone, you withdraw and you try and do something safe. But unfortunately, that's an ever decreasing circle. And what it does is it's easier to tell stories to yourself. So depersonalization, that's that patient, that, and categorize people and put more and more distance between you and them. So that's that kind of mental distance from the job. And I can kind of understand it, but it's probably the opposite of what positive psychology would say to anyone that was depressed or burnt out. It's not okay to just assume that someone's got to harden up, armor up. That reactive resilience is counterproductive in the long term. And that lack of empathy and communication, that seeming detached and cynical, does further complicate things with patients, and it does lead you open to far more in the way of complaints, which again is a big source of stress and feeds into this cycle of burnout. The reduced personal efficacy side of it, I could probably best describe by when I finally came to finish work, and we've all got a reason why it's not going to be now. Maybe I can go until March, or maybe I can go until September, because for me it was because that's when so-and-so will be going to school and childcare finishes and things go that, and I don't want to put them through that change, or it's going to be difficult now because we're not sure about my husband's job, or it's going to be easier to do it then because it's not over such and such period, or I've got a payment coming up for something or other. Is that there's always a reason why not now and why it should be later. But the problem is once you're burnt out and once you're in that state of mind, is that you've already shut down. You're probably doing more defensive dentistry. You're probably trying to protect yourself from possible complications, possible sources of stress, possible things that might go wrong. You're already likely to be from that kind of energy depletion and exhaustion in a cycle of maybe taking more sick days and maybe trying to avoid being there altogether. So I had told myself these stories that I would, I think originally I'd wanted to go until my youngest started school, and it was just too far away. In the end, I pulled it back to before she went to school, and we went on a holiday back to the UK instead, and it gave me a much closer benchmark. But I think it was something like the 3 months before I finished, or maybe the 5 months before I finished, I happened to look back over the same period of time for the previous, I think 10 years I'd been working at this place, and I earned far less. It was like less than half than I had in any period in that time before. So the same months in previous years, less than half. And I mean, you could chalk that up to they knew I was leaving, so there probably wasn't as much going into my book. But I think I put it down to that you feel that you're protecting yourself and playing it safe, but what actually you're doing is you're just trying to get people in and out of the door, so you're not prescribing as much new treatment because you'd just rather people went away, that was them done, that dentistry and patients would just leave your life. And I used to kind of talk about it in terms of who won today. Did the patients win today? And it seems a strange thing to look back on now, but it just felt like some days the patients had all of my energy and I had nothing left. I was an empty vessel by the time I got home. So it is a bit of a grey area that feeling exhausted and depleted of energy is so linked into dentistry anyway, and the ebb and flow of our normal and natural kind of year and its paths, that one, we can kind of say that we're just tired and ignore the other signs of burnout. Or the other is that we can be encouraged into feeling that we're burnt out and we're actually just tired. So I say just reflect, take your time off. If you find all you're thinking about and dreading is going back to work, then I would suggest that you probably seek some counselling, because it was transformative for me and I still use it. You don't want to wait until you need it. And I put this analogy in terms of toothache for audiences when I'm talking on stage, is that, we tell our patients, what do we tell the patients this time of year who have left it? They've had a broken tooth that they've known about. They put up with it. They've gone with it. Now they're in severe pain. And the options to them are root canal or tooth out. Whereas had we seen them a year before, we might be talking about doing a simple restoration. Well, it's no different with your mental health and with burning out. If you can see someone regularly and be caught before you're at that catastrophic burnout point, it will do you all the more good. Unfortunately, seeking that help and admitting that you need that help is still heavily stigmatized, and to the point that it's not actually easy, once you recognize you need that kind of help, to necessarily find someone that you want to talk to. someone that's not necessarily associated with professional bodies or things linked to the industry, because you don't want to raise flags there. And it becomes an obstacle in itself for getting help. So look after yourselves. This is a difficult time of year. Look out for your colleagues and what's going on through their lives and the support that they might need over the Christmas period. Manage your book and your team, because again, a lot of this exhaustion and these tiring things can be managed by identifying what types of appointments, what layout of a book stresses and exhausts you, and put blocks in so that the appointments aren't made like that, so you don't have a day full of things that are just going to knock you flat, that it's sprinkled around everything else so that you can kind of manage it. And seek, if you've not had professional counselling, even if you don't feel like it, is just check in. Again, going back to Nigel Larter's presentation, he kind of stepped up there and he opened with, I haven't had a dental checkup in 8 years. And what's worse is my wife is a dentist. And he said, you could hear the intake of breath and the gasp from a dental audience of, oh, gosh, how terrible, how dare you. He said, but when was the last time someone checked in on you and your mental health? Why should it be any different? Why should we be expected to be ticking along on our own without anybody else checking in with us and letting us know when we're starting to kind of drift toward the edges? So look after yourself, reach out if you need, join the conversation on Twitter at Fang_Farrier, and enjoy yourselves. Do what you enjoy, do what recharges you. Enjoy Christmas and your loved ones, and I'll catch you on the other side. Cheers.